High in the desolate mountains of Colorado, under the watchful gaze of the Sangre de Cristo Range, sits a prison unlike any other. Known as ADX Florence or simply Supermax, it is the most secure prison in the United States, a place where silence reigns and hope struggles to survive. This is not just a prison, it is a fortress designed to hold the worst of the worst, those deemed too dangerous for even the harshest conventional prisons. Built in 1994 in response to a series of violent incidents in other high-security prisons, ADX Florence represents a radical departure in the philosophy of incarceration. It is a place of extreme isolation, where human contact is minimized and every aspect of life is tightly controlled. The prison's very location speaks to its mission of absolute containment. Surrounded by miles of barren landscape, escape from ADX Florence is considered virtually impossible. Even the most hardened criminals, those who have carved their names in the annals of crime, find themselves humbled and diminished within its walls. This is the story of ADX Florence, a place where the boundaries of punishment are tested and the human spirit is confronted with the ultimate challenge: to endure. For the 375 inmates at ADX Florence, life is stark and routine. Each prisoner spends 23 hours a day in a 7-by-12-foot cell. Natural light filters through a narrow slit in the wall. Meals are passed through a slot in the steel door. Human interaction is limited to brief encounters with guards. 1 hour a day is reserved for solitary recreation. Prisoners exercise in a small concrete enclosure. The sky is a distant rectangle framed by high walls. Even basic necessities are strictly controlled. The cells are monitored, a reminder of their lack of autonomy. ADX Florence has earned its reputation as the Alcatraz of the Rockies through a combination of sophisticated technology and brute force security measures. The prison is surrounded by a series of imposing fences, topped with razor wire and patrolled by armed guards and attack dogs. Motion sensors, pressure pads and laser beams create an invisible web of surveillance, instantly detecting any attempt to breach the perimeter. Security cameras, strategically placed throughout the facility, provide constant monitoring of every nook and cranny, leaving no blind spot for potential escapees. But the true strength of ADX Florence lies not just in its physical barriers, but also in its ability to control the movement of its inmates. Prisoners are moved through the facility in shackles and handcuffs, escorted by multiple guards trained to respond swiftly and decisively to any threat. Steel doors controlled remotely compartmentalize the prison into a series of secure zones, limiting the potential for large-scale disturbances. Even the air the prisoners breathe is filtered and monitored, a precaution against chemical attacks. No prisoner has ever escaped from ADX Florence, a testament to the effectiveness of its multi-layered security apparatus. It is a place where the possibility of escape is not simply remote, it is considered non-existent. The roster of inmates at ADX Florence reads like a who's who of America's most notorious criminals, men considered too dangerous to be housed anywhere else. Among the most infamous residents is Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose reign of terror left 3 people dead and dozens injured. Then there's Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, an act of terror that foreshadowed the horrors to come. And Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the surviving Boston Marathon bomber whose act of violence left 3 people dead and hundreds injured. These men are symbols of evil, housed in the most secure prison in the land. Section 5. The Price of Isolation, Psychological Impact. The extreme isolation and sensory deprivation experienced by inmates at ADX Florence take a heavy toll on their mental and emotional well-being. Studies have shown that prolonged solitary confinement can lead to a wide range of psychological problems, including anxiety, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, and suicidal thoughts. Inmates at ADX Florence have described feeling like they are buried alive or slowly being erased. The lack of meaningful human contact, combined with the constant surveillance and control, creates an environment of intense psychological pressure, pushing many inmates to the brink of sanity. Some inmates cope with the isolation by withdrawing into themselves, becoming withdrawn and unresponsive. Others lash out in anger and frustration, engaging in self-harm or acts of aggression towards guards. The prison has been the target of numerous lawsuits alleging cruel and unusual punishment, with former inmates describing the debilitating effects of their time in solitary confinement. The psychological impact of ADX Florence extends beyond the individual inmates. Critics argue that the prison's harsh conditions create a breeding ground for mental illness, making it difficult, if not impossible, for inmates to rehabilitate and reintegrate into society upon their release. Section 6. Supermax model, a global phenomenon. The Supermax model of incarceration pioneered at ADX Florence has become increasingly influential both within the United States and internationally. In the wake of high-profile prison escapes and riots, many countries have sought to replicate the perceived success of Supermax, building their own versions of these high-security facilities. Proponents of the Supermax model argue that it is a necessary tool for managing the most dangerous and disruptive elements within the prison population. They point to the dramatic decrease in prison violence and escapes since the introduction of Supermax prisons as evidence of their effectiveness. However, the spread of the Supermax model has also been met with growing concern from human rights groups and penal reform advocates. They argue that the extreme isolation and sensory deprivation inherent in Supermax confinement constitute cruel and unusual punishment, violating international human rights standards. The debate over the Supermax model reflects a fundamental tension within the criminal justice system, the need to balance security concerns with the humane treatment of prisoners. As more countries adopt this controversial approach to incarceration, the ethical and practical implications of Supermax confinement will continue to be debated for years to come. Section 7. Controversy and Critique, a Necessary Evil, ADX. Florence, despite its formidable reputation and seemingly impenetrable security, has not escaped criticism. Human rights groups and penal reform advocates have long condemned the prison's conditions, arguing that they constitute cruel and unusual punishment, violating both domestic and international law. The central point of contention is the prolonged solitary confinement endured by inmates. Critics argue that such extreme isolation, often lasting for years or even decades, inflicts severe psychological damage, leading to a range of mental health problems, including anxiety, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, and suicidal ideation. Furthermore, concerns have been raised about the lack of transparency and accountability within ADX Florence. The prison operates under a veil of secrecy, making it difficult to monitor conditions and ensure that inmates are treated humanely. Reports of abuse and neglect have surfaced over the years, further fueling concerns about the prison's practices. The debate over ADX Florence highlights a fundamental dilemma: how to balance the need for security with the moral imperative to treat all human beings, even those who have committed heinous crimes, with dignity and respect. It is a question that continues to challenge policymakers, legal experts, and the public at large. Section 8. The future of Supermax reform or replication. The future of ADX Florence and the Supermax model it embodies hangs in the balance. On one hand, the prison's success in preventing escapes and reducing violence within its walls has led some to call for the expansion of such facilities, arguing that they are a necessary tool for managing the most dangerous criminals. On the other hand, mounting evidence of the psychological harm inflicted by prolonged solitary confinement, coupled with ethical concerns about the treatment of prisoners, has fueled calls for reform. Some advocate for limiting the use of solitary confinement, exploring alternative approaches to managing difficult inmates, and providing greater access to mental health care within prisons. The debate over the future of Supermax reflects a broader societal conversation about the purpose of punishment. Is it simply about retribution and incapacitation, or should it also include an element of rehabilitation, aiming to prepare inmates for eventual reintegration into society? The answer to this question will have profound implications not only for the inmates confined within ADX Florence and other Supermax prisons, but also for the criminal justice system as a whole. Section 9. A stark reminder: the duality of justice. ADX. Florence stands as a stark reminder of the duality of justice. It is a testament to society's need to protect itself from those who pose a threat to public safety, a place where the most dangerous individuals are kept under lock and key. Yet, it is also a sobering testament to the human capacity for cruelty, a place where the boundaries of punishment are tested and the debate over the humane treatment of prisoners rages on. The extreme isolation and sensory deprivation endured by inmates raise troubling questions about the psychological toll of incarceration and the very nature of justice itself. As we grapple with the complexities of crime and punishment, ADX Florence serves as a constant reminder that the pursuit of justice must be tempered by compassion and a commitment to upholding the fundamental rights of all individuals, even those who have committed the most heinous acts. For in the end, our humanity is measured not only by how we treat the innocent but also by how we treat the guilty.